Later in this hour, we'll hear from Jodie Emery, marijuana legalization activist, the wife of another very well-known marijuana legalization activist, Marc Emery, who at the moment is imprisoned in a federal prison in the U.S., down south somewhere, all for the quote-unquote crime of selling marijuana seeds. It was interesting as well, after Marc Emery was arrested and was facing extradition back to the U.S., the DEA in the U.S. actually put out a press release where they described his arrest as a blow to the legalization movement. In other words, essentially admitting that the arrest was political. Then you have the bizarre spectacle of us, the Canadians. Marc Emery was in Vancouver. He was selling seeds to Canadians and Americans. We never did anything. We never arrested him or charged him. Yet we allowed the Americans to have him. And it never happens that way. If someone's committing a crime in Canada or in the U.S. as well, if that's a crime, if that act is a crime, we would arrest the person. We would deal with them. And if it's not a crime, we would never extradite someone to go face justice somewhere where it is a crime. And so that's what has really bothered me about that case. So anyway, he'll be done his sentence next year. The U.S. has approved a prison transfer, so the Marc Emery could come and serve out the rest of his sentence in Canada, closer to his family and friends. But the federal government, maybe not surprisingly, dragging their heels. They've not said no. They've really not said anything. So Jodie Emery is in Ottawa today to try to get some answers or some clarity. She'll be with us later. Our final half hour here tonight, the Rob Breakenridge Show, for Tuesday evening. Just sticking with what's going on in Ottawa, today was a day for supporters of Marc Emery to blitz the phones, to make their case, to demand that the public safety minister bring Marc Emery back to Canada. Now, Marc Emery's a Canadian. He's been in jail in the U.S. For the last few years. I would say unjustly so for a number of reasons. First and foremost, just to me, selling marijuana, or selling marijuana seeds even, is not a crime. Should not be a crime. I don't know what you're going to do with a marijuana seed anyway. The thing was, Marc Emery was selling seeds in Canada for a long time, and not only did we look the other way, that's not even the right way to put it, he was claiming that income. He was listing seed selling as his occupation, as the reason why he got that income, and he was paying taxes on that income. But he caught the attention of the Americans, not for the seed selling per se, but because of his activism on legalization. And so all this while, we sort of ignored his seed selling. Then the Americans saw an opportunity to get him. So at that point, all of a sudden, we became concerned, but we didn't charge him. But we played a part in allowing the Americans to take him into custody. Marc Emery was extradited to the U.S. to face charges in Washington State, which has now legalized marijuana. But Marc Emery was convicted, and he is continuing to serve his sentence in a federal prison. Now, he will be eligible for early release, I believe, sometime next year, maybe around the middle of next year. But Marc Emery recently requested a prison transfer to Canada. He's a Canadian citizen, which would mean he would come back to Canada to serve out his sentence. The U.S. government approved that request. So all that remains is for the Canadian government to approve that request. They've not done so. They've not really said anything about it. So today, as mentioned, Jodie Emery, the wife of Marc Emery, certainly a well-known activist in her own right, was in Ottawa meeting today with members of some of the other parties to press the case, and supporters were jamming the phone lines, calling the public safety minister's office and urging him to approve this prison transfer. It was a 5-year prison term that Marc Emery received. You can read more at cannabisculture.com. Also, there's a website set up for Marc's case, Free Marc, that's Marc with a C, freemarc.ca. Joining us on the line here tonight is the aforementioned Jodie Emery, wife of Marc Emery. Jodie, great to talk to you here tonight. Welcome to the program.
Hey, thanks for having me back.
All right, well, just some more information on where things stand with regard to Marc's case. He remains in prison in Missouri, I believe it is, in the U.S.
Or Mississippi.
Mississippi, rather. And so what's the latest on his situation?
Well, Marc's early release date for good behavior is July 9th next year, but at this time he has a transfer application in the hands of the Canadian government. As you mentioned, it's been approved by the U.S. Department of Justice, We're simply waiting for the public safety minister to sign off on it.
And has there been any, I mean, obviously that's not yet happened, but have you received any kind of a response from the new public safety minister?
The only response is a signed letter to supporters saying that their endorsement for Marc's transfer has been received, but due to the Privacy Act, no comment can be made. Even Member of Parliament Libby Davies received a letter basically saying that they can't say anything to her without Marc Emery's permission. So they're finding any way they can to just keep quiet on the issue.
Yeah, well, I mean, clearly they're trying to avoid this. I mean, it seems unusual that I think most of the time, as I understand it, once a prison transfer is approved by the inmate, by the other country, that it's normally a formality then that Canada would sign off on it as well. That's not happening here, is it?
Ever since 2006, the Conservatives have stopped approving prisoner transfer requests, even when the United States federal government and the Canadian courts have ordered them to obey the treaty and do so. So this government, I can't believe they're saying no to the United States for the first time ever, but they are, and it's simply in regard to making Canadians continue to suffer abroad while their families wait at home anxiously for them, like I do. I just want Marc to get home as fast as possible, but this government has no deadline, and it seems they have no interest. In fact, their comment on this press conference today was that they believe the opposition is simply promoting the drug trade. That's outrageous. We all know that this is about a Canadian citizen seeking to come home under the treaty with the United States. And Member of Parliament Wayne Easter, he's a public safety critic, and he was the public safety minister who approved transfers many times. Mm-hmm. So he was able to speak that this is something that should be done on a regular basis, and this government, the Conservative government, is refusing to abide by that. They're being negligent.
All right, so you do have support then from the opposition parties on this?
Absolutely, and Libby Davies was here. She said that the NDP public safety critic Randall Garrison also supports us. And with Wayne Easter as the public safety minister, I've heard that the entire Liberal caucus supports this. So in a month or so, I hope to present a formal letter showing that we have political support from all levels of government, even including a senator, saying that Marc Emery deserves to come home.
Now, if the prison transfer was approved, would he still have to serve his time until next year, and he would just do so in a Canadian prison?
Unfortunately, yes. The Conservatives changed the agreement, so Canadians used to be able to be transferred home and get immediate release if they had finished two-thirds of their sentence. Yeah. Well, the Conservatives have changed that to ensure that Canadian prisoners transferred home are detained for at least some period of time. So Marc would be in the Canadian prison system, and quite frankly, at this point, it's taking so long to get a transfer response, he might not even get out much sooner than if he were to stay in the U.S. So,
because I mean, once
we're just waiting.
Yeah, I mean, if he finishes his time in the U.S. jail, once he's freed from jail, he's free to come home then, isn't he?
Yes, once he's free next July 9th, we'll be able to get him on the way home.
So he's coming back to Canada one way or another. It just seems really petty on the part of the government to let him languish in this U.S. prison at this point.
Absolutely, but this government clearly has no interest in supporting me or the cause that I represent. So it's not really a surprise, but it's a shame that, especially considering we just celebrated Citizenship Week, they won't even recognize the value of a Canadian citizen imprisoned abroad. And there are 1,500 Canadians in prisons around the world waiting to come home, and this government is just forgetting them.
Well, and yeah, I mean, you say it's not a surprise. I mean, this is the same government that allowed Marc to be taken into custody by U.S. officials, extradited to the United States, and sentenced to time at a U.S. jail. I mean, just the whole idea of that happening in the first place, someone that lives in Canada is a Canadian that we had no interest in prosecuting, to ship him off to face U.S. justice. I mean, that occurred under this government.
Absolutely. They extradited him, and I'm sure that they would have done more to him had they been in power when he was first indicted. But at this point, again, I don't imagine that they'll approve his transfer, unfortunately, but I do hope that I can at least demonstrate that the will of the Canadian people is being ignored in this case.
Well, talk about the support and talk about the kind of response you're getting on this issue, on this campaign.
We've been getting a lot of support. People still meet me and say they're outraged about this. We're getting petition signatures and generally just a sense that Marc Emery should come home, and that's been going on for many years now.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is, look, obviously you're very much active on the legalization issue. Certainly that's been Marc's cause for many, many years. But is this separate from that question? I mean, the question of Marc's status and this prison transfer, are we able to separate that from the debate over legalization?
In this case, I think we can say yes. This is an issue of a treaty agreement with the United States. A Canadian who qualifies for transfer, meets all the criteria, is not a threat to Canada, and for all intents and purposes should be transferred home. But perhaps it's political that they're choosing to ignore his case, and I would think that the minister's response, commenting on promotion of the drug trade, demonstrates that they believe that's what this is about, even though it's not.
Yeah, but of course, I mean, it is linked to the issue, isn't it? Because
Well,
Marc is behind bars.
That a harmless Canadian who hurt nobody
Exactly.
was being punished in such a way. So absolutely, there are a lot of people who do face punishment under the law for cannabis crimes, and they haven't hurt any other human beings, but they're being hurt by the government and by the prison system. So that's something definitely that comes up here.
So Marc was selling seeds to consenting adults, and we've decided, or I guess the Americans have decided, that they would spend thousands upon thousands of dollars to lock him up for the act of doing so, even though the prosecutor who prosecuted Marc, he's now changed his mind on the issue, hasn't he?
Yes, they spent millions of dollars on his case, and nobody really agrees with it. So everyone's just waiting for this minister to approve it. We have U.S. government approval, the prosecutor, the judge, everybody endorses transfer. So we're just waiting on the minister.
All right. Well, I guess if nothing else, Jody, if they're not going to approve this transfer, they should stand up and own the decision and say that they're not going to. This running from it and hiding from the question, that's really unbecoming, isn't it?
Absolutely. They should comment on it. If they have so much faith in our system, then they should be able to act on it. But with this government, like I've said before, getting any sort of answer from them on anything would be a news story in itself. So, don't expect much from them.
All right. Well, anyway, as mentioned, more at cannabisculture.com, also freemarc.ca. That's Marc with a C. Jody, all the best with this, and thanks for making some time for us here.
Great. Thank you so much for calling, and I hope people continue to call the minister today to join the phone blitz that's been going on.